Eleanor placed her teacup in the sink, but the clink sounded louder than usual. It was the only sound left in the house. The morning light crept into the kitchen with a dull greyness that didn't quite touch the floor. Outside, frost clung to the windows. Inside, the silence carried weight, made heavier by the absence of humming. Robert used to hum softly while boiling eggs every morning for 42 years. Now even the silence had sharp edges. The table was clean, the chairs tucked in. No trace of yesterday's guests, their polite words still echoing in the hallway. He was a good man. You must be proud. Let us know if you need anything. They left before dessert. Brittany had stacked the cake slices into napkins for the freezer. Eleanor smoothed her hands down the front of her cardigan. The navy one. Robert had liked this colour on her. She tried to make breakfast as usual, half out of habit, half hoping the normalcy would soothe the chill in her chest. She cracked 2 eggs into a pan, started the kettle, set out a plate for Michael, one for herself. He walked in without looking up. The click of his shoes on the floor was quicker than usual. A man rushing nowhere. "You don't need to cook," he muttered. "I know," she said gently. "It's just habit." He poured coffee into a travel mug. The eggs sizzled behind him, ignored. She watched him, hoping he might turn around, might notice she'd set his cup on the counter just where Robert always did. Instead, he leaned against the fridge, his shoulders stiff. "I can't feed you any more, Mum." The pan hissed behind her. Eleanor turned the gas off slowly, as if the sound had hurt someone. She picked up the plate, emptied the eggs into the trash, and washed the dish without a word. "I've got my own family to think about," he added softer now. Not apologetic, just stating facts like they were rearranging furniture. Brittany appeared in the hallway with Emma in a puffy coat car keys jangling in her hand. She didn't say good morning. She didn't even glance in Eleanor's direction. Emma waved shyly. "Bye, Aunt Eleanor. Bye, sweetheart." Eleanor's smile was steady, even as the door closed. When they were gone, the house expanded around her in the worst way. She could hear the tick of the clock in the living room, the hum of the heater struggling to warm a space no one seemed to want her in. She didn't argue, didn't ask why or how long had he felt this way. The words, "I can't feed you," weren't just about food. They weren't even about money. They were about belonging, about permission. And now, clearly, she no longer had it. Eleanor retreated to her room after rinsing the last teacup. She folded her cardigan, slowly placed it over the back of her chair, and sat for a long time by the window, watching nothing in particular. The sun never fully came out that day. Shadows moved across the floor like they didn't know where to settle. That night, without a sound, she began packing. Not everything, just a few pieces. A scarf Robert had bought her on their 20th anniversary. The photo of them at the lake house. A small wooden box of letters. She hesitated at her nightstand fingers grazing the edge of the bottom drawer. Something told her to open it, though she didn't know what she was looking for. Inside was a yellowed envelope. Her name on the front in Robert's familiar hand. She had never seen it before. Eleanor opens a drawer, finds an old note from Robert that she never read. The paper had yellowed, but Robert's handwriting remained firm, deliberate, like always. Eleanor held it gently between her fingers, careful not to crease the already fragile corners. The envelope had been tucked away, almost hidden beneath old receipts and instruction manuals in her nightstand drawer, as if he hadn't meant for it to be found, at least not immediately. The light from the desk lamp flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the walls of her room. She unfolded the note slowly. It wasn't a love letter, not a farewell. Just one line, neat and exact. "September transfer, remember to check the asset list again." There was no greeting, No signature. Just that single sentence, businesslike yet personal in its implication. Robert never wrote anything carelessly. If it was on paper, it mattered. Eleanor stared at the word transfer. Her mind flickered back to early September, what had been happening. Then Robert had been in and out of the hospital. He'd spoken vaguely of paperwork. A notary had come by, though she hadn't been included in that conversation. Her eyes dropped to the small string of numbers in the corner of the note. It looked like an account number, but not one she recognized. Their joint savings had been at the local bank. She'd checked it after the funeral barely enough to cover the expenses. So, what was this? She pushed back from the desk and wrapped the cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The heater made soft clicking noises struggling against the winter air, but her thoughts drowned out everything else. Robert had always been meticulous. He used to balance the checkbook down to the penny-kept folders for every decade of their life together. And yet this one note was outside the system. A deviation. She thought of Michael then, of the way his eyes had avoided hers when she asked whether Robert had mentioned anything before passing. He'd shrugged, said it was all taken care of, that there wasn't anything left. She hadn't questioned him, until now. Eleanor picked up a pen from the drawer and a small notebook from the bottom shelf. She began jotting down keywords: September transfer account, asset list, hospital notary. Then she drew a timeline. It was clumsy, uneven, but her hands had stopped trembling. Every few minutes, she paused, looking at the envelope again. She tried to recall the last clear conversation with Robert before his health declined. He'd been sitting in the sunroom, sipping tea, looking out at the maple tree in the backyard. He said something strange then. If anything happens, remember what we built didn't end with me. At the time, she thought it was sentiment. Now it sounded like instruction. The paper in her hand wasn't just a note. It was a breadcrumb. The fog of grief began to shift slightly. She still felt its presence pressing down, but somewhere inside a different energy stirred. Something sharper. Focused, not anger, not yet. Curiosity. Resolve. She stood, slowly walked to her closet, and pulled out a small suitcase. Quiet, careful motions. She didn't want Michael asking questions in the morning. He would try to reassure her, or dismiss her. She didn't want either. She packed lightly, only what she needed for a few days. Notebooks, the note, warm clothes, Robert's watch. One photograph. Then she picked up her address book. Her finger traced down the names, stopping at one written in blue ink: Joan M. Cartwright. Joan had lost her husband 3 years ago. They used to meet for tea once a month before everything became about caretaking and doctors. Eleanor hadn't spoken to her since before the funeral. She put on her coat scarf and boots. Quietly opened the door. The air outside stung, but she welcomed it. The street was dark. Only a few porch lights glowed in the distance. She knocked gently at the narrow door of a modest basement apartment. It took a moment, then footsteps approached from behind the curtain. She knocked on the door of an old friend's small rented room, Joan, who had lost her husband like her. Joan handed her a cup of instant cocoa. Still like it with no sugar, she asked. Eleanor nodded, almost forgetting to smile. The warmth of the mug seeped into her palms, though the cocoa itself was lukewarm. They sat in a small room with a single space heater that buzzed and clicked, barely pushing the cold back. A frayed rug covered part of the wooden floor. The curtains didn't quite meet in the middle, letting in the occasional gust of wind that swayed the lamp's glow. Joan sat across from her legs, tucked under a crocheted blanket, eyes sharp beneath grey lashes. She didn't ask questions, not right away. Just waited. Eleanor let out a slow breath, watching it curl in the air. I wasn't asked to leave, she said softly. It just became clear I wasn't meant to stay. Joan didn't flinch. She sipped her cocoa, then said, "Still sounds like you were shown the door, just wrapped in prettier words." Eleanor gave a dry laugh, surprised at herself. "I suppose so." They talked quietly for a while about whether the heater that only worked if kicked once the grocery store now carrying oat milk. Then silence again. A familiar one, not uncomfortable. Joan leaned back and studied her. "You always had that spark, Elle. I see it again. Just different this time." Eleanor looked down at the hem of her sleeve. Her hands trembled slightly more from memory than cold. "It's strange," she murmured. "I feel like I'm seeing myself from the outside, like I've aged backwards and suddenly remember who I used to be." Joan didn't respond. Instead, she stood and brought over a folded wool blanket, laying it gently over Eleanor's knees. "There's a public printer at the pharmacy 2 blocks down, if you need to look up anything." Eleanor blinked. "Why would I need? I saw the envelope you were holding last night. You looked at it like it was a map." She nodded slowly. It might be. Later, while Joan fixed a bowl of soup on the hot plate, Eleanor opened her old laptop. It groaned as it powered on the screen, dull from months of disuse. She typed slowly, fingers stiff. Her email inbox bloomed open like a neglected garden, some overgrown, some wilted. Among dozens of newsletters and automated notices, she searched for bank messages. She tried to log into their joint account. Access denied. She double-checked the spelling, the security questions, her password. Still denied. Her chest tightened. She clicked through to account recovery, only to find a message. "This account has been closed due to inactivity and ownership revision. Please contact support." Ownership revision? She sat back, breath shallow. The room felt colder. Joan's voice floated from the kitchenette. "Soup's ready. Got crackers if you want." "I'll be there in a minute," Eleanor said, barely hearing herself. She scanned the inbox again, this time looking by date. October. A few weeks after Robert's funeral. There it was. Subject: regarding the trust. Urgent signatures needed. The sender's name didn't ring a bell. A law firm address she didn't recognize. The email was marked unread. She hesitated before clicking. An unread email from October. Regarding the trust. Urgent signatures needed. Sent by an unknown lawyer. The email was short, but the signature at the bottom struck her harder than any insult Michael had ever said. Charles E. Granger, partner. Granger London Row, LLP. The name sent a ripple through her chest. It was like opening a drawer you'd forgotten existed and finding something fragile but intact inside. Robert had mentioned him once, maybe twice, back when they were reviewing their will. That had been years ago, when everything still felt certain. Eleanor sat in the far corner of a small cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and a pawn shop. The place was modest. Bustling, its warmth came more from movement than actual heat. A couple of college students chatted behind her about exam schedules. Someone laughed at the counter. The espresso machine hissed. She barely heard any of it. Across the table, Joan stirred her tea. "Charles Granger," she said, after reading the name aloud. "That man used to handle Robert's business ages ago, back when you two were still at the lake house." Eleanor nodded. "I didn't realize they were still in touch." "You don't forget a name like that," Joan said, folding her hands over her mug. "You're going to call him. I need to know what he meant by urgent signatures." Eleanor pulled out her phone, the screen slightly smudged. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad. She'd never liked making cold calls, even less so since Robert had passed. But this wasn't about courtesy. This was about something buried, something moved without her knowing. She searched the firm's number and called. The line rang twice before a sharp-voiced secretary picked up. Granger, Lund and Rowe. How may I assist you? Yes. I'm looking to speak with Charles Granger, please. I'm afraid Mr. Granger is unavailable at the moment. May I take a message? I believe he sent me an email, Eleanor said carefully. It's regarding a trust. After the passing of Robert H. Whitman. There was a pause, then a soft click. Another voice came on. Slower, older, familiar in a way she couldn't name. Eleanor, she blinked. Yes. Mr. Granger. Yes. When I sent that message, I wasn't sure it would reach you. She tightened her grip on the phone. It did. I found it just yesterday. I see. I wasn't certain who had access to your accounts after Robert passed. There were complications. Eleanor straightened. Complications? Charles exhaled. Robert made some last-minute amendments to the trust. He named you as co-controller, but the documentation requires both parties' signatures. We never received yours. I didn't know there were documents to sign. That's what concerns me, he said gently. The cafe noise faded into a static hum. Dishes clinked, someone laughed again, but it all seemed far away. He updated the trust in late August, Charles continued. We sent follow-ups in September and October. After Robert passed, I received a message confirming one signature was received, but it wasn't yours. That's why I wrote to you directly. Eleanor pressed her free hand against her lap to still the shaking. Mrs. Whitman? Charles said carefully, Did you sign any papers after Robert died? Charles asks, Did you sign any papers after Robert died? Eleanor is silent, suspicious of Michael. Michael sets the casserole dish on the table without a word. Eleanor looked at the steam rise, silent like him. The room smelled faintly of canned green beans and overcooked beef. The lighting was dim, one bulb flickering above the dining table. Eleanor sat in the same chair she'd used for years, but everything else felt unfamiliar. The cushions were new. The table runner was gone. Even the sound of utensils clinking seemed sterile, too clean. Emma slid into her seat across from Eleanor, her elbows just barely off the table. Brittany followed quietly, placing a bowl of dinner rolls next to the dish. Mom, Michael said flatly, I figured you'd want to grab the rest of your things. Brittany found the sweater you were asking about. Eleanor nodded. Thank you. You're welcome to eat before you go. Brittany offered her tone soft but tight around the edges. A peacemaker. Eleanor noted not because she wanted to be, but because someone had to be. They passed plates around. No one reached for seconds. The silence wasn't thick. It was empty hollow, like a house half abandoned. Eleanor chewed slowly each bite, bringing back the taste of meals she used to make from scratch roasts, soups, fresh bread. Tonight's dinner was all processed and preheated. Small talk hovered awkwardly. How's school? Eleanor asked, gently glancing at Emma. Emma brightened, relieved to speak. Okay, we had to make a diorama today. Mine was about space. I used cotton balls for the Milky Way. Eleanor smiled, sincere, for a moment. That sounds beautiful. Michael cleared his throat. She's doing well. Silence again. Eleanor looked at her son. He didn't meet her gaze. Instead, he stabbed at a lump of meat with his fork. She sipped water, then spoke lightly. I tried logging into the joint account last week. It was closed. Michael looked up, his expression unreadable. That was Robert's account. It closed after he passed. Standard. I see, she replied calmly. I received an email from a Charles Granger. Michael stiffened. Dad gets mad when I ask about Grandpa's office. Emma said suddenly, her voice innocent, unaware she'd broken the surface. The air shifted. Michael's fork clanged against his plate. Emma, he said sharply. We don't talk about things we don't understand. The girl's face fell. Brittany reached over, patting her daughter's hand. Eleanor said nothing. Michael stood. Dinner's over. I'll get your boxes. He left the room without another glance. Eleanor set down her fork. The food had gone cold anyway. Brittany offered an apologetic glance but said nothing. She guided Emma toward the living room, whispering about homework and baths. Eleanor rose slowly, wiping her mouth with a paper napkin. She walked through the hallway alone, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. The house seemed smaller than before, quieter, though not in the peaceful way. She passed the study, Robert's office. Once a space filled with books, sketches, a soft leather chair. The door was closed. She reached for the knob. It didn't turn. There was a new lock, metal polished out of place on the old wooden door. Eleanor looks across the hallway, sees Robert's office door is locked with a new lock. She returned to the house the next morning, not as a mother, but as a guest with a reason. The driveway was still damp from last night's drizzle. Eleanor stepped out of the cab with her coat buttoned to the collar and her hands wrapped tightly around a leather-bound notebook. She didn't carry bags, only questions. Michael had already left for work. Emma was at school. Only Brittany remained inside her car, still parked out front, her presence quiet but pulsing like an invisible barrier. Eleanor knocked politely, though she still remembered where the spare key had always been. Brittany opened the door after a moment, her smile thin. "You forgot something." Eleanor returned the smile equally hollow. "Just some of Robert's old tax files. I think they might still be in his study drawer." Brittany hesitated, stepping aside. Michael really wants to leave that room untouched, kind of like a memorial. Eleanor nodded once. "I understand. I'll only be a minute." The hallway smelled faintly of detergent and something artificial lavender sprayed over dust. The wooden floor creaked as she walked, each step measured. The locked door stood ahead, same polished handle, same deliberate silence behind it. She reached into her pocket fingers, closing around a key she hadn't used in months. It was small, old brass, worn at the edges. She slipped it into the drawer lock of the cabinet just outside the office. With a soft click, it opened. Inside, she found familiar things, old pens, a cracked glasses case, the edge of a yellowing envelope. She pulled it out. A photocopy neatly folded, titled Property Transfer Agreement, Whitman Estate. Her name appeared in print beside Robert's. The section for her signature was blank. She stared at the line. The date was 3 days before Robert's hospitalization. The other signature, Robert's, was there, strong and clean. But hers had never been requested, never added. She folded the document back carefully and slid it into her notebook. Behind her, the floor creaked. Brittany stood at the end of the hall, arms crossed. "I thought you said you were getting tax papers." "I changed my mind," Eleanor replied, voice even. Brittany's eyes flicked toward the locked door. "Michael really doesn't want that room touched. He said it helps him grieve." Eleanor said nothing. Brittany stepped closer, her voice quieter now but harder. "I hope you're not planning to cause trouble, Eleanor." As she's about to leave, Brittany says coldly, "I hope you're not planning to cause trouble, Eleanor." Robert never trusted many people, Charles said. But he trusted you to see things through. That's why he left the notes for you. The rain traced delicate threads across the tall windows behind Charles's desk, softening the grey afternoon light into something almost warm. Eleanor sat in a deep leather chair opposite him, notebook in her lap, posture upright. She didn't tremble when she pulled out the folded paper and placed it on the polished desk. Charles adjusted his glasses, spreading the document flat. His office was lined with walnut shelves, worn legal volumes, and a faint scent of old paper and citrus polish. The secretary outside typed steadily, a quiet presence behind the frosted glass door. "Robert signed this," Charles said, tapping one edge of the page. "But there's no counter-signature." "I never saw it," Eleanor replied calmly. "Not until last week." Charles's brows drew inward. "That would explain what I found." He turned to his computer, pulled up an email folder, and clicked through a series of messages. "After Robert's update in August, I sent all necessary documents to you at the address on file." He turned the screen toward her. "To eleanor.james@postmail.com." She leaned in. "That's not mine. Mine has no period. It's just Eleanor James all together." Charles exhaled. "Then they never reached you?" She looked at the screen again. "Who submitted that address?" He turned back to his chair. "Michael filled in the paperwork following Robert's passing. He listed you as co-controller, but he also included contact updates. This email address is one of them." Eleanor folded her hands. "So I was legally part of the trust, but never received the documents to finalize it." "Correct. And without both signatures, control defaults to whoever can present documentation first." Michael used the old agreement from before the amendment. She didn't blink, and no one questioned it. The firm did raise concerns. But the funeral was barely over, and he presented himself as the acting head of the estate. "We assumed you were aware. In hindsight, you assumed wrong." Charles leaned forward. "Robert wanted you to have control. He trusted you with the long-term decisions. He even noted in our private memos, 'If anything happens, Eleanor will know what to do.' She sees the whole picture." Rain continued tapping at the glass. Eleanor stared at the document, the misdirected email, the weight of a name she once trusted. Charles's voice softened. "Did Michael ever take you to sign anything you don't remember?" She shook her head. "Nothing official. He handed me a receipt for funeral flowers. That's it." Charles opened a drawer, pulled out a folder. "If you want to pursue legal action, I can help. But I must warn you, it will ruin everything." She looked him in the eye, voice steady. "It already is." "Grandma, do you miss Grandpa every day?" Emma asked, her fork still in midair. The little restaurant was quiet at this hour, half an hour before the dinner rush. The booth near the window caught the last golden light of the day. Outside, traffic moved slowly, like everything had decided to breathe a little slower for once. Eleanor smiled gently. "Yes, sweetheart. Every single day." Emma looked down at her plate, poking the mashed potatoes without interest. "I do too." He always kept candy in his coat pocket. The soft kind. Eleanor's heart ached, not just at the memory, but at how precisely Emma remembered the small things. She folded her napkin carefully, watching the child's face. "Do you ever go into Grandpa's study?" she asked softly, trying not to sound too interested. Emma shook her head. "Dad locked it. Even the drawer with the pretty silver watch. He said it was yours, but now it's his." Eleanor's fork paused mid-cut. "Oh, that watch used to be in the tall drawer, right?" Emma nodded. "Yeah. He put the key on a necklace once. I saw it when I was little." The waiter refilled their water without interrupting, leaving them in their bubble of warmth and unspoken truths. And the box with papers, Eleanor pressed gently. "Did Grandpa keep anything else?" Emma brightened, as if remembering a secret. "In the garage, there's a brown box with a red sticker. It's behind the ladder and the paint cans. Dad moved it after Grandpa's funeral, but didn't open it. He said it's old stuff." Eleanor's eyes narrowed just slightly enough to signal recognition. "Do you remember where in the garage Emma grabbed the crayon from the kids' menu and began sketching? Her drawing was simple lines for walls, a square for the garage door, and an X behind the shelves. But to Eleanor, it was vivid. She'd stood in that garage hundreds of times, watching Robert sort through papers while humming under his breath. She folded the drawing and tucked it into her coat pocket like a map. Grandma Emma said, looking up again, "Why didn't you take anything with you when you left Eleanor?" Reached across the table, brushing a crumb from the child's cheek. "Sometimes you have to leave first, before you can find what's really important." Emma didn't fully understand, but nodded anyway, satisfied with the moment. The plates were cleared. The light outside had turned from gold to soft blue. As they walked out, Emma wrapped her arms around Eleanor's waist in a sudden hug, face pressed against the wool of her coat. "Grandpa always said you were the one who never forgot anything." She ran her fingers along the rusted edge of the workbench, remembering the scent of oil and cedarwood. The garage behind Michael's house hadn't changed much. The same dented toolbox sat under the window, the ladder leaned in its habitual corner, and the air still held the faint metallic tang of engine oil mixed with time. Eleanor stood for a moment, just breathing it in. She slipped the old key into the side door. The lock hesitated but turned. Inside, her flashlight beam danced over familiar shapes, paint cans, boxes with yellowing labels, forgotten gardening tools. She kept the beam low, careful not to spill light into the yard. The sky outside was darkening, pressing against the high window panes. She walked to the back wall, just behind the shelving unit. There, it was a brown box with a red sticker tucked under a worn tarp. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it out. The cardboard crackled in protest. Inside the box, among folded tarps and worn-out gloves, sat a small tin container. She brushed off the dust and opened it. A handwritten note lay on top. "To L, if you ever need to know." Her breath caught. She recognized Robert's handwriting, instantly deliberate, upright, always careful with spacing. She unfolded the note gently as if it might vanish. Beneath it, a small bundle of envelopes tied with twine, a USB drive, a lined notebook filled with dates, names, amounts. His tidy records, just like he always kept organized in quiet defiance of the chaos around him. She opened one envelope, her name on the front, the ink slightly smudged. The letter was dated a week before Robert died. "If something happens to me and they try to shut you out, remember the trust is in your name too. I updated everything. Charles knows. Michael doesn't have the final word. You do. I wanted to tell you in person, but I feared what might follow if I spoke too soon. Use the USB. It has scans, emails, voice notes. This is not just about money. It's about not letting love be rewritten by those who forget who helped build it. I trust you. Like always." Her hands closed around the paper, as if it might anchor her. The light on her flashlight dimmed. She turned it off. The memory of Robert filled the space more brightly than any beam. She placed the USB and notebook carefully in her coat pocket, closed the tin. A sound outside. Tires crunching gravel. She turned sharply. Eleanor looks up, hears a car stop in the driveway. "Someone is coming." "You shouldn't be here," Michael said, his voice low. Eleanor didn't flinch. The kitchen lights cast a sterile, cold glow over the countertops. The air smelled faintly of reheated pasta and detergent. Eleanor stepped forward quietly, her coat still damp from the night air, the tin box wrapped inside. Michael stood at the sink, frozen a towel in one hand. The clatter of a dropped fork echoed behind him. For a second, neither of them moved. Eleanor placed the letter on the table. Slowly, deliberately. No words. Michael turned. His eyes scanned the handwriting. He didn't sit down, just stood there reading in silence. A flicker of discomfort passed across his face. Then a crooked smile. "This proves nothing." Eleanor said nothing. She pulled the chair back gently and sat down. Her eyes didn't leave his. The silence stretched thick and charged. She could hear the refrigerator hum, the distant creak of the wooden floor above Emma shifting in bed. She looked up toward the stairs, then back at Michael. "You remember the silver watch?" she asked, voice even. "The one Dad said he'd leave for Emma." Michael's jaw tightened. "That's not what this is about." He stepped forward suddenly and slammed his palm down on the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "This is my house," he growled. "I took care of things. I handled the paperwork. I didn't need you snooping around in the garage like some. But the words faltered. Eleanor didn't react, not even a blink. She looked at him for a long moment, not with accusation, but with something quieter, something more unsettling knowing. Then she stood. From her coat pocket, she pulled the USB and set it beside the letter. "You might want to see what's on this before the lawyer does." She didn't wait for his answer. She turned toward the door, her footsteps soft against the tile. As she reached for the handle, she glanced up the stairs once more toward Emma's room, then let herself out into the night. "You didn't tell me you had the original recording," Charles said. "That changes everything." The line crackled faintly, as if distance itself was holding its breath. Eleanor sat still, her fingers wrapped around the porcelain teacup, the warmth bleeding slowly into her palms. Outside the window, low clouds rolled in above the quiet street. Somewhere below, a dog barked once, then silence returned. Joan sat across from her, knitting, half-heartedly, eyes occasionally lifting. She said nothing. Eleanor appreciated that. "I had to be sure before I gave it to you," Eleanor replied. Her voice was soft, but steady. "Now I am." On the other end, Charles's energy was palpable. "You don't realize what you've got. This isn't just a letter. The metadata from that USB proves Robert recorded those instructions himself days before his death. No signatures, no tampering. Just a straight line from him to you." Eleanor looked down at her tea. The light caught on the surface, a glint of something too calm to be ordinary. Charles continued, his voice brimming. "If Michael tries to contest this, we have time-stamped proof of manipulation." That word manipulation settled over her like dust in a room long undisturbed. She took a breath. "And if I take it to court," Charles paused, "we'll win." "Almost certainly." Eleanor didn't move. She studied the lines in her palm, the cup resting within them. "And then what? I lose my child, and Emma loses her father." Across from her, Joan looked up, still silent, still present. She reached for the teapot and refilled Eleanor's cup without a word. "I didn't come this far to win a war that breaks my family into smaller pieces," Eleanor murmured. Charles was quiet now. "What I want," she said, "is for the record to show the truth. I want my name where Robert meant it to be, on file, on record. And I want it to live somewhere official, somewhere it can't be erased again." "You're asking for a public re-entry," Charles said, voice measured. "No lawsuit, just legal reinstatement. Quiet, visible, irrefutable." "Yes." There was a pause. Then something shifted in Charles's tone. Respect. Maybe something more. "That will be louder than any courtroom could ever be." Michael's face froze as the notary read aloud. "Mrs. Eleanor James is reinstated as co-trustee per the updated documents, as signed by Robert James, dated July 12th. The room was too bright. Eleanor thought not because of the windows, but because of how sharply every detail stood out. The polished mahogany table, the scent of printed paper and stale coffee, the rows of legal pads and document folders lined like soldiers. Every sound, from the turning of pages to the gentle hum of the ceiling light, felt too loud and too exact. She sat still, her back straight, hands folded loosely on her lap. Michael sat across from her, jaw clenched. The small twitch at the corner of his eye was the only betrayal of emotion. Brittany beside him didn't reach for his hand. She simply looked ahead, her lips pressed together. Charles leaned slightly forward, his tone crisp but not cruel. The documents have been examined and compared. The original update dated July 12th includes Mr. Robert James's signature, as well as the intended co-trustee designation, Mrs. Eleanor James. The notary nodded, then glanced around the room as if checking that everyone had heard. A secretary scribbled notes at the far corner. Eleanor said nothing. She wasn't here to gloat. She wasn't here for money. She was here to exist properly, visibly in the records Robert had left behind. "Do you have any questions?" Charles asked, not looking at Michael directly. Michael shook his head once. His mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but no words followed. His suit looked too stiff on him. His tie was just slightly askew. Brittany still didn't speak. There was movement in the doorway. Eleanor turned her head slightly. Emma stood there holding something in both hands. It was a framed photo, Robert smiling gently in his garden, one hand resting on the top of the fence he built decades ago. Emma clutched it to her chest like it was something fragile and precious. She didn't come in, but her eyes never left her grandmother's face. The notary cleared his throat and announced the conclusion of the session. Copies were signed, stamped, filed. The secretary took them into the back office. Charles stood and extended a hand toward Eleanor. She rose slowly, steady. Michael didn't rise. When she walked past him, he didn't meet her eyes. Emma stepped back slightly to make room as Eleanor neared. The girl looked up then, with a shy movement, held the photo forward. "It's Grandpa's favorite," she said softly. "He said you took it." Eleanor took the frame, gently nodding once. Her hand brushed Emma's for a second longer than necessary. In the hallway, Charles caught up to her. "Robert would have been proud," he whispered. Eleanor paused. The photo felt warm in her hands. "I'm not done yet," she said. "I could stay," Eleanor said, voice calm. "But I no longer need to." The morning air filtered softly through the thin curtains in Joan's small apartment. Outside, the trees along the narrow street had turned a deep gold, their leaves curling at the edges. The sun held its warmth just long enough for one more cup of tea, for one more folded sweater, laid gently into an old suitcase. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, a worn envelope in her lap. Joan was still asleep in the other room, the quiet punctuated by the occasional creak of pipes, the hum of traffic below. She opened the letter carefully. "Dear Grandma, I miss you. I wish you lived with us again. But I understand now. Dad isn't kind, and sometimes I think he's scared. I found the silver watch in the drawer. It's still ticking. I wear it on my wrist when I do my homework. Love, Emma." Her fingers pressed the paper flat. No tears, came just a long exhale that felt like something lifting from her chest. She folded the letter and tucked it between the pages of a worn paperback Robert once gave her, The Old Man and the Sea. The irony made her smile faintly. She stood and began packing the last few items. The scarf Robert had knitted her one winter, a clumsy, lopsided thing, was folded gently into the bag. Everything else she left neatly stacked at the foot of the bed. Someone else might need them. Joan appeared in the doorway, leaning slightly on the frame. She looked at the packed suitcase, then at Eleanor. "You sure this is the end of the road? Not the start of another?" Eleanor gave her a small smile. "Maybe both." They didn't hug at first, just stood close. Then Joan stepped forward and held her hand warm and firm. No words were needed. Downstairs at the corner mailbox, Eleanor placed a small envelope into the slot. Inside was the house key. No note, no explanation. Just a simple final gesture. Michael would understand, or he wouldn't. That part no longer belonged to her. At the bus station, she chose the middle row, not the front where the world rushes in, nor the back where things feel too far gone. The middle was just enough. She watched the yellow trees blur past as the engine pulled away from the curb. She takes the earliest bus, sits in the middle row, looks far away through the window, says nothing. The blue shutters were still there, faded but intact, just like her. The paint had chipped in places, revealing soft grey wood beneath. But the colour still held on stubborn against wind salt and time. Eleanor stood at the gate, her suitcase beside her, the faint scent of seaweed carried in on a gentle breeze. She looked up at the windows, squinting slightly in the afternoon sun. The small white house hadn't changed much, though the path of pebbles leading to the door was more worn than she remembered. The old landlord shuffled to the porch with slow, careful steps. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, so she didn't try for much conversation. He smiled, pressed the cool brass key into her palm, and with a small wave turned and left her standing alone. She didn't mind. The lock clicked open with a soft resistance. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and lemon oil. The space was quiet, no echoes of recent life, just the gentle hum of a home waiting. The furniture was sparse, a small sofa, a wooden table, one bookshelf near the window. And on that shelf, leaning at a slight angle, was a photo frame. She walked over and lifted it. It was the picture of her and Robert, taken by a passerby on their 15th anniversary. He had his arm around her, laughing mid-sentence. She hadn't known the photo still existed. She ran her finger gently along the frame's edge. "You kept it," she whispered. She didn't cry. Instead, she moved with quiet purpose. She opened every window, letting the wind through. She dusted each surface, not to clean, but as if reintroducing herself. A soft cloth passed over the table, the shelf, the windowsill. "Hello," she said quietly with each stroke. "Hello again." From her bag, she removed the letter Robert had written, the one that changed everything, and placed it on the bookshelf beside the photograph. She didn't need to read it. Its weight was already inside her. At the kitchen sink, she filled a chipped ceramic vase with water and placed a bunch of wildflowers inside yellow and white, freshly picked from the roadside earlier that morning. The colours brightened the small kitchen. They didn't need to last long. She stood in the doorway of the living room for a while, watching the sea through the window. The waves moved in steady rhythm, never in a rush, the kind of rhythm a life could follow. Then suddenly, and without warning, she heard it, a laugh. Robert's laugh, not from outside, not from within, but from the place memory resides. And for the first time since he passed, Eleanor smiled in return, her chest lifting without ache. She turned on the lamp in the corner. The warm light bounced off the walls, a soft gold that wrapped around her like a shawl. She turns on the light. The warm light bounces off the wall, then sits in a recliner, opens a new diary, and writes the first line, "I am Eleanor. I remember everything." "They say grief fades," Eleanor told the empty table. "But I never wanted it to." The inn was quiet, save for the faint creak of floorboards and the occasional call of gulls outside the open windows. Widow's Wake sat just up the coast, its wooden shingles weathered by years of salt and wind. It was the kind of place people stumbled upon when they had nothing left to chase, and maybe everything left to say. Eleanor sat at her usual spot, a round table tucked into the corner near the bookshelf. A steaming cup of black tea rested beside her notebook pages, filled with thoughts not meant to be profound, but honest. Observations. Fragments. Truths Robert had once spoken when no one else had been listening. She wasn't writing for Emma. not directly, but she hoped maybe one day someone like Emma would find these words and feel less alone. The innkeeper, a woman named Hazel, walked by, nodded silently, then returned to the front desk. Hazel had lost her husband a decade ago. She didn't say much, but she always noticed. She was the one who had first handed Eleanor a blank notebook and a pen and said, "You'll know what to do." Eleanor smiled faintly at the memory. A young woman was seated nearby, reading one of the small printed booklets Hazel had arranged for guests. The woman couldn't have been more than 30, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of each page. "I wish my grandma had written down what she felt," the girl murmured aloud, not knowing anyone was listening. Eleanor looked up, her expression unreadable at first. Then her lips curved not into a sad smile, but something steadier, softer. Not at the pain of loss, but at the quiet realization that she had offered something meaningful. Later, she walked to Hazel's desk and placed the closed notebook in front of her. "Would you mind making a few more copies?" Hazel nodded. "We're running out. People keep taking them home." Eleanor chuckled gently. "Good." That afternoon, a letter arrived. It was small, folded, twice addressed in a hand that still clung to careful practice. Eleanor opened it slowly, fingers tracing the return address before reading the first line. "Dear Grandma, I found the silver watch. Dad said it's mine now, but I think he's wrong. It was meant for you first. Love, Emma." She held the letter in her hands for a long time. The paper trembled slightly, not from grief, but something else. Something like release. Eleanor stepped behind the counter where Hazel kept a collection of small keepsakes for guests to browse. From the pocket of her coat, she withdrew the old rusted watch, once Robert's, then Michael's, then claimed by no one. Eleanor looks out to sea, pulls out her rusty pocket watch, no longer needed, and places it on the counter and says, "Pass it on to the next girl who needs to remember where she came from." The sun slipped behind the horizon, and Eleanor didn't look away this time. It disappeared gently, like someone exiting a room with quiet understanding. The sea darkened to a shade of ink, and the sky softened into ash. In the window of the small house with blue shutters, a warm yellow light glowed a modest defiance against the coming night. Inside, Eleanor sat at her small kitchen table, a teacup in one hand, a pen in the other. The notebook was open before her, the last page waiting. The room smelled of steeped chamomile and the faint salt of the sea. Her handwriting was slower now, not from weariness, but from care. "I was left behind, but I didn't stay there." She placed the pen down beside the cup and leaned back in her chair. The wind whispered through the open window, curling the steam from her tea into little spirals that danced upward and vanished. She poured a second cup and placed it across from her. No one sat in the chair opposite, but that didn't matter. The motion itself was enough. For a moment, the steam from both cups mingled, then parted. The house was quiet, no clocks ticking, no radios humming. Just the wind and the waves and the pulse of Eleanor's own breath, steady and unhurried. She looked toward the window again as the last light shifted across the wall, grazing her cheek. She didn't feel alone. She thought of Robert not as someone lost, but as someone absorbed into the fabric of her days. In the light, the sea, the silence. In every decision she now made without needing permission. She didn't ask for her old home back. She had become her own home. She rose slowly and placed the 2 cups in the sink. The porcelain clicked gently, echoing a familiar rhythm from long ago. Then she returned to her chair, lifted the notebook once more, and traced her fingers over the cover. A breeze lifted the curtains, bringing with it the scent of lavender from the garden patch she'd planted just last week. She closed the notebook, set it on the shelf beside Robert's letter and the photograph. No ceremony, no farewell. Just a quiet gesture of wholeness. She didn't need to be remembered. She just needed to remember herself. She didn't fight with noise. She fought with memory, with dignity, with the quiet courage of someone who had lost everything, yet still chose not to disappear. In the end, she didn't demand revenge. She simply reclaimed what should never have been taken. Justice may arrive late, but it resonates like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.